The 50 most famous artworks by Francisco de Goya. Number 50. Equestrian Portrait of Ferdinand VII. From 1808 to 1814. The equestrian portrait of Ferdinand VII encapsulates a crucial stage in the history of Spain during the 19th century, marked by the Napoleonic Wars and the restoration of the monarchy. This imposing oil on canvas was commissioned to reinforce the monarch's legitimacy after his return to power. The artist, known for his mastery of equestrian representation, captured not only the figure of the king, but also the symbolism of absolute power at a time of political upheaval. Ferdinand VII appears in a haughty pose, wearing classical-style armor evoking Roman emperors, consolidating his image as protector of the nation. Technically, the work stands out for its dynamic and detailed composition. The horse, depicted with precise musculature and in movement, conveys strength and control, while the folds of the king's clothing reveal the artist's mastery in capturing textures. The slightly blurred background draws attention to the monarch and reinforces his centrality. The color palette, dominated by warm tones, enhances the majesty of the figure, while the contrasts of light and shadow give depth to the scene. In the artist's career, this portrait symbolizes a high point in his ability to combine technique and political propaganda. The painting not only reflects the artist's expertise, but also his ability to adapt to the demands of the court. On a historical level, this work became an icon of the return of absolutism, encapsulating the aspirations for stability after a period of war-torn instability. Interestingly, the horse is said to have been inspired by a Spanish breed known for its elegant bearing and docile temperament, a detail that connects the work with the country's equestrian tradition. Number 49. Don Manuel Osorio Manrique de Zuniga. From 1787 to 1788. The portrait of Don Manuel Osorio Manrique de Zuniga is a masterpiece of child portraiture, created during the 18th century, a period when the bourgeoisie and nobility sought to perpetuate their lineage through portraits loaded with symbolism. In this oil-on canvas, the child appears in a vibrant red suit that contrasts beautifully with the more muted tones of the background, a detail that enhances his presence. Accompanied by carefully selected animals, such as a cat and birds, the painting symbolizes childlike innocence and the transience of life. The technique employed is notable for its meticulous attention to detail, especially in the texture of the fabrics and the fur of the animals. Each element is composed with almost photographic precision, from the lace of the costume to the feathers of the birds, which seem about to take flight. This level of detail reveals the painter's dedication to capturing not only the appearance, but also the essence of the person portrayed. In the artist's career, this painting is emblematic of his ability to transcend the simple portrait, incorporating narrative elements that enrich the composition. The balance between realism and symbolism gives the work a unique character. In addition, the painting has been the subject of multiple interpretations, from considerations about its religious symbolism to psychological analyses of the bond between children and animals. A fascinating fact is that this painting is currently in a prestigious collection, which reinforces its relevance in art history. Number 48. Christ Crucified. 1780. The work Christ Crucified, executed in 1780, is a solemn and deeply emotional representation of the climax of the Passion. In the middle of the 18th century, this painting reflects the neoclassical approach and the intention to capture divinity in its maximum expression. Christ appears suspended on a naked cross, with his body carefully modeled based on a precise anatomical study. The serenity of his face contrasts with the implicit pain of the crucifixion, transmitting a message of redemption and hope. The use of light and shadow. His ability to evoke deep emotions through the simplicity of visual elements is a testament to his artistic genius. This painting quickly became a reference point for Christian iconography, being reproduced in numerous engravings and lithographs. As a curious fact, it is said that the painter studied real corpses to achieve a striking realism in the representation of muscles and skin. Number 47. Saint Bernardine of Sienna preaching before Alfonso V of Aragon. 1783. The painting Saint Bernardine of Sienna preaching before Alfonso V of Aragon is an exceptional example of 18th century historical and religious painting. The painting depicts a scene charged with meaning, in which the saint preaches fervently before the monarch, surrounded by a diverse group of figures. The carefully orchestrated composition places the saint at the center, with a gesture of eloquence that draws attention to the divine message he is conveying. Technically, the work stands out for its dynamic composition and use of a color palette that balances warm and cool tones. The detail in the characters' faces and clothing reflects the painter's ability to capture the individuality of each figure, while the architectural elements in the background provide depth and historical context. In the author's career, this painting marks a high point in his ability to fuse narrative and technique. Through this work, the painter managed to immortalize a historical and spiritual moment, consolidating his reputation as one of the leading visual chroniclers of his time. The work has been admired for its ability to capture the emotional intensity of the moment, transporting the viewer to the center of the scene. An interesting detail is that the saint's staff is decorated with inscriptions alluding to actual sermons of Saint Bernardino, adding an additional layer of historical authenticity. Number 46. The family of Don Luis de Borbone. From 1783 to 1784. The group portrait entitled The Family of Don Luis de Borbone is an extraordinary example of 18th century court painting. Created at a time of political transition in Europe, this work shows the Infante Don Luis surrounded by his family in a domestic scene that, although apparently simple, is loaded with symbolism and details that reveal the status and aspirations of those portrayed. The distribution of the figures and the use of light guide the eye towards the center, where Don Luis becomes the main focus. The work is technically masterful, with an astonishing level of detail in the fabrics, jewelry, and furniture that frame the scene. The texture of the brocade, the luster of the pearls, and the reflections on the musical instruments are testament to the painter's ability to capture materiality with almost tangible precision. Furthermore, the use of a richly nuanced color palette lends warmth and depth to the composition. This portrait is particularly relevant in the artist's career, as it reflects his ability to humanize the nobility without sacrificing the grandeur characteristic of this type of commission. Through the combination of psychological portraiture and visual narrative, the work becomes a testimony to the social and familial complexities of the time. As an intriguing detail, some scholars have pointed out the presence of a clock discreetly placed in the background, interpreting it as a reminder of the inexorable passage of time. Number 45. The Martianus of Pontos. 1786. In the context of the late 18th century, the painting, The Martianus of Pontos, stands as an emblem of the transition between the Rococo and Neoclassical styles, reflecting the influences of a changing Europe. Painted in 1786, this work belongs to the prominent Spanish portraitist Francisco de Goya. The painting captures the Martianus with a restrained elegance, enveloped in an atmosphere of aristocratic grace that symbolizes both her social position and the cultural refinement of the time. The background, which features a garden in delicate tones, provides a sense of serenity and balance that contrasts with the meticulous details of her clothing. Technically, the work stands out for its impeccable handling of light and color. Goya uses soft, precise brushstrokes to depict the textures of the fabrics, while the nuances on the Martianess's face convey an almost palpable liveliness. Her expression mixes sweetness and authority, elements that consolidate the visual impact of the portrait. Every detail, from the flowers in her headdress to the filigree of her fan, reveals Goya's mastery in capturing the individual essence of the sitter. This work is a testament to his ability to combine technical detail with psychological depth, marking an evolution in his personal style. In Goya's career, the Martianus of Pontos represents a key moment that underlines his transition towards a more personal and distinctive artistic language. The portrait transcends conventional genre by integrating symbolic elements that allude to the social status of the Martianess and her connection with the natural environment, an innovative resource in the art of portraiture. This painting, made shortly before his more experimental works, stands out for its ability to influence later artistic trends and establish Goya as a reference for European portraiture. A fascinating detail of the work is how Goya manages to balance the influence of the trends of the time with a sensitivity that anticipates the traits of Romanticism. This not only reinforces the narrative richness of the painting, but also invites us to reflect on the artistic evolution of a master who challenged the stylistic norms of his time, leaving an indelible mark on the history of art. Number 44. The Death of Saint Joseph. 1787. In 1787, Francisco de Goya presented The Death of Saint Joseph, a work that stands out for its deep emotional charge and religious symbolism. Set in the context of the late 18th century, this religious painting reflects the intense devotion that characterized Spain at that time. Goya addresses a moment full of solemnity and spirituality, the passing of the patriarch Saint Joseph accompanied by the divine presence. The composition highlights the link between the earthly and the heavenly, capturing an instant of transition with unique sensitivity. From a technical standpoint, the work stands out for its triangular composition, which directs the viewer's gaze towards the serene face of Saint Joseph. Goya uses a warm color palette to convey peace, while contrasts of light and shadow add depth to the pictorial space. The angels in the scene not only serve a decorative function, but also reinforce the spiritual narrative, highlighting the connection between humanity and the heavenly plane. The expressions on the characters' faces are a testament to Goya's ability to convey complex emotions through masterful brushstrokes. The Death of Saint Joseph holds a special place in Goya's career, not only as an example of his technical mastery, but also for his ability to infuse a religious subject with humanity. This work demonstrates his ability to fuse traditional elements of sacred art with a more personal and emotional approach, characteristics that would mark his work in later years. A fascinating detail is how Goya uses the interplay of glances between the characters to guide the visual narrative. This device, which may seem simple, actually adds a psychological depth to the scene, inviting the viewer to reflect on the moment of death as a step towards eternity. Number 43. The Worship of the Name of God. 1772. The Adoration of the Name of God, completed in 1772, is a monumental work in which Francisco de Goya displays a technical and conceptual virtuosity that cements his reputation as a fresco painter. Commissioned to decorate the vault of the Curated in the Basilica del Pilar in Zaragoza, this work integrates narrative complexity with an extraordinary command of architectural space, reflecting the Baroque influences that predominated in the 18th century. The work shows a group of angelic figures worshiping the divine name, inscribed in the Hebrew tetragrammaton, surrounded by heavenly light. The composition is designed to create a sense of upward movement, guiding the viewer's gaze towards the center of the scene. Goya employs vivid colors and a masterful use of chiaroscuro, creating an effect of depth and dynamism that transforms the vault into a stage of heavenly glory. This fresco represents a crucial point in Goya's career, as it was one of his first major commissions and marked his consolidation as a prestigious artist. Although his style would evolve towards more personal and expressive forms, at this stage Goya shows his ability to adapt to the stylistic canons of the time, integrating his own elements that anticipate his artistic maturity. One particularly interesting aspect is how Goya manages to create an atmosphere of transcendence by balancing the heavenly light with the materiality of the characters. This detail not only highlights his technical talent, but also underlines his ability to connect the divine with the human, a recurring theme in his later work. Number 42. The Garatillo. From 1786 to 1787. Between 1786 and 1787, Francisco de Goya painted El Garatillo, a work that addresses one of the darkest and most disturbing themes of his work. Framed in the context of a society marked by violence and public punishment, this painting portrays the execution of a condemned man by garrote, a common method in 18th century Spain. Goya uses the scene to explore the brutality of the judicial system and human emotions in the face of death, offering a critical perspective that anticipates his more mature and heartbreaking look at the human condition. The composition is deliberately austere, with a focus on the condemned man and the spectators surrounding him. Goya uses a dark palette, dominated by grays and browns, to emphasize the somber atmosphere. Quick, expressive brushstrokes reinforce the tension of the moment, while the characters' faces reveal a range of emotions from indifference to horror. This focus on collective psychology is a distinctive feature of Goya's style, which separates him from his contemporaries. In the context of his career, El Garatillo sets a precedent for the more introspective and critical works that would characterize his black paintings. This work not only documents a historical event, but also invites reflection on the nature of power and justice, themes that would resonate throughout his artistic career. An intriguing detail is how Goya manages to convey a sense of inevitability in the scene, using the closed composition to draw the viewer into the drama. This resource reinforces the narrative tension and underlines the rawness of the moment, leaving an indelible impression on the viewer of the work. Number 41. The Junk Dealer. 1779. In 1779, Francisco de Goya presented The Cocharero, a work that combines a costumbrista approach with keen social observation. The painting portrays a street vendor surrounded by a crowd examining his wares, a subject that reflects everyday life in 18th century Spain. This work is a testament to Goya's ability to capture the human dynamics and cultural particularities of his time, infusing a seemingly simple scene with a narrative depth that transcends the anecdotal. Technically, the work stands out for its balanced composition and attention to detail. Goya uses warm colors and soft lighting to create a welcoming atmosphere, while the expressions and postures of the characters reveal a vibrant interaction. The potter, located at the center of the composition, becomes the visual and emotional axis of the scene, symbolizing the figure of the humble worker in a society marked by hierarchies. In the context of Goya's career, the junkman represents an early example of his interest in popular and costumbrist themes, which would later evolve into a more explicit critique of social inequalities. This work demonstrates his ability to combine a keen sense of observation with impeccable painting technique, consolidating his reputation as a visual chronicler of his time. A fascinating aspect of this painting is how Goya manages to convey a sense of vitality and movement in a seemingly static scene. This subtle yet powerful detail highlights his talent for capturing the essence of everyday life, inviting the viewer to immerse themselves in the world he so authentically portrays. Number 40. The Wounded Bricklayer. From 1786 to 1787. In the middle of the 18th century, the wounded bricklayer emerged as a testimony to the sensitivity towards the working classes that was beginning to manifest itself in European art. Painted between 1786 and 1787 AD, this work is inserted in a historical context marked by the social changes derived from the Industrial Revolution, which began to transform the work dynamics and living conditions of workers. The painting masterfully reflects the vulnerability and effort of bricklayers, considered pillars in the construction of modern cities. Technically, the work stands out for its earthy color palette, which lends a sense of realism and proximity to the scene. The author uses a detailed focus on the bricklayer's hands and face, capturing the muscular tension and fatigue that accompany his daily work. The composition is carefully balanced, with the injured man as the central figure, surrounded by work tools that contextualize his physical effort. This focus on material details contributes to the emotional charge of the scene, making it deeply human. In the author's career, The Wounded Mason marks a turning point, where art not only seeks to represent beauty or the divine, but also the everyday and the suffering. The work has a significant impact on the development of social art, anticipating later movements such as 19th century realism. Its influence endures in the history of art, inspiring other artists to address themes related to struggle and human sacrifice. A fascinating detail is the small engraving in the background, which shows a construction site, alluding to the perpetuity of human effort and the fundamental role of bricklayers in the transformation of the urban landscape. Number 39. The Shipwreck. From the year 1793 to the year 1794. Set in the turbulent 18th century, The Shipwreck encapsulates the spirit of an era characterized by maritime exploration and humanity's constant confrontation with the indomitable forces of nature. Painted between 1793 and 1794 AD, this work portrays chaos and despair on the high seas, reflecting a historical moment where the sea was both a promise of riches and a symbol of mortal danger. The technique employed by the author is masterful, combining dynamic brushstrokes that bring the moving waves to life with a dark color palette that intensifies the atmosphere of tragedy. The composition focuses attention on the survivors fighting the storm, while the ship fades into the horizon, almost devoured by the water. The light, carefully used, highlights the faces of the sailors, creating a dramatic contrast that emphasizes their suffering and their struggle for survival. The Shipwreck is a key work in the artist's career, as it represents his interest in capturing the relationship between man and the uncontrollable forces of nature. This approach influenced other Romantic artists, who explored similar themes in their own works. The painting also resonates with audiences of its time, recalling the frequently occurring maritime tragedies and evoking an immediate emotional connection. A particularly intriguing element is the inclusion of a small glimmer of light on the horizon, possibly a lighthouse, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the devastation, recalling human resilience in the face of adversity. Number 38. Portrait of the Countess del Carpio, Marchioness of La Solana. From 1757 to 1795. Portrait of the Countess del Carpio, Marchioness of La Solana, created between 1757 and 1795 AD, is presented as a work that captures the elegance and power of the nobility in the middle of the 18th century. This portrait not only celebrates the figure of an influential woman of the time, but also reflects the author's ability to convey the character and dignity of his models through painting. The technique used is sublime, with a focus on the texture of the clothing, which combines golden and deep blue tones to highlight the status of the Martianess. The meticulous brushwork highlights the details of the jewels and embroidery, while the Martianess's serene expression conveys a sense of authority and wisdom. The neutral background helps to focus all attention on the central figure, creating a balanced and harmonious composition. In the author's career, this portrait represents one of the high points of his ability to capture the essence of his subjects. Furthermore, the work offers a visual testimony of the fashions and customs of the aristocracy of the time, consolidating its importance as a historical and artistic document. A captivating detail is the book held by the Martianess, a possible allusion to her intellect and her interest in knowledge, elements uncommon in female portraits of her time. Number 37. The Conjuring. From the year 1797 to the year 1798. The Conjuring, created between 1797 and 1798 AD, is a work that explores mysticism and superstition in a period when Enlightenment rationality was beginning to challenge popular beliefs. Set at the end of the 18th century, the painting captures a mysterious ritual, possibly related to esoteric or religious practices. The composition is eerie, with a dark color palette dominated by red and black tones that intensify the atmosphere of mystery. The author uses light and shadow to guide the viewer's gaze towards the center of the scene, where a figure performs a ritualistic act. The characters' gestures and expressions on their faces suggest a state of trance or fear, adding an emotional layer to the visual narrative. The Conjuring is a fundamental work in the author's repertoire, as it addresses unusual and challenging themes for its time. Its representation of the unknown influenced later artists who explored the supernatural and the psychological in their works. The work also reflects a growing interest in occult practices in certain sectors of society at the time. A fascinating detail is the presence of a symbol engraved on the floor, the interpretation of which remains a subject of debate among art historians, adding to the aura of mystery surrounding the painting. Number 36. The Washerwoman. 1779. The Washerwoman, completed in 1779 AD, is a work that celebrates the everyday lives of working women in the 18th century. In a context where most artistic depictions focused on nobility or religious themes, this painting stands out for its focus on common activities and the dignity of humble work. The technique is detailed and meticulous, with an emphasis on the textures of water and fabrics. The author uses a light color palette to convey a sense of freshness and serenity, while the composition carefully balances the elements of the landscape with the human figures. The women, depicted with natural postures and focused expressions, bring a sense of authenticity and emotional connection. In the author's career, The Washerwoman is a work that underlines his interest in portraying ordinary people, moving away from the grandiloquent themes that dominated the time. This sensitivity towards the everyday had a lasting impact on art, paving the way for later movements such as realism. A lovely detail is the presence of a child playing by the river, which adds a touch of warmth and humanity to the scene, recalling the intergenerational connection in the communities of the time. Number 35. The Madrid Fair. 1778. In 1778, in the middle of the 18th century, Francisco de Goya presented The Madrid Fair, a work that captures the essence of the popular festivities of the time. This oil on canvas stands out for its lively representation of daily life in Madrid, imbued with warm colors and a dynamism that reflects the spirit of Spanish society. The work is framed in the context of a period in which fairs were spaces for cultural encounters, commerce, and entertainment. Through this painting, Goya not only narrates a festive scene, but also offers a window into the social life of 18th century Madrid. From a technical point of view, Goya used loose brushstrokes that, although apparently chaotic, reveal an unrivaled mastery in composition. The attention to detail in the traditional costumes, the gestures of the characters, and the play of light and shadow is a testament to his ability to capture reality with a unique artistic sensitivity. The work stands out for the interaction between the characters and the background, a balance achieved thanks to the artist's mastery in the use of space and perspective. In terms of relevance, this work is set at a crucial moment in Goya's career, when he was beginning to establish himself as a keen observer of Spanish society. His ability to capture costume-burst scenes and endow them with psychological depth marked a before and after in his artistic career. The Fair in Madrid is not only a testament to the painter's talent, but also an invaluable visual document of the customs and traditions of the 18th century. An interesting detail of this painting is the presence of small humorous touches in the expressions of some characters, a feature that denotes Goya's irony and wit. These subtle inclusions enrich the visual narrative, making this work as complex as it is captivating. Number 34. Self-Portrait. Circa 1815. Around 1815, in the 19th century, Francisco de Goya painted a self-portrait that is notable for its introspection and emotional depth. At this stage of his life, Goya was facing both personal and professional challenges, which translates into the expressive intensity of the work. This self-portrait is not only a physical representation of the artist, but also a window into his emotional and psychological state. With a face marked by shadows and minute details, Goya offers us an image that transcends mere appearance to explore the depths of the human soul. The technique used in this work demonstrates the master's artistic evolution. The use of dark colors and dramatic lighting create a contrast that emphasizes the facial features. The texture of the brush and the subtle nuances of the skin reflect an attention to detail that denotes his mastery of portraiture. Despite the apparent simplicity of the composition, each stroke is carefully calculated, achieving a perfect balance between realism and expression. This self-portrait takes place at a crucial stage in Goya's life, when his deafness and the political turmoil in Spain profoundly affected his worldview. The work becomes a testament to his resilience and his ability to find in art a form of introspection and resistance in the face of adversity. This portrait, more than a work of art, is a reflection of his soul and a symbol of his artistic legacy. A fascinating detail is how Goya hints at a slight, restrained smile, an ambiguous gesture that could be interpreted as a sign of hope or resignation. This enigma adds an additional layer of depth, inviting the viewer to speculate on the emotions hidden behind his penetrating gaze. Number 33. Truth, Time and History. 1814. In 1814, against the backdrop of the 19th century, Francisco de Goya created Truth, Time and History, an allegory that explores universal concepts through a deeply symbolic visual language. The work, created in the aftermath of the Spanish War of Independence, reflects the artist's concerns about the impact of conflict on identity and collective memory. Each figure depicted in the painting embodies an aspect of the universal narrative: truth as an ideal, time as an inescapable force, and history as a witness and chronicler. From a technical perspective, Goya once again demonstrates his ability to manipulate light and shadow, using a chiaroscuro that gives the figures an almost sculptural dimension. The textures and folds of the clothing are rendered with impressive realism, while the hazy backgrounds create a dreamlike atmosphere that enhances the allegorical character of the scene. The interaction between the figures is fluid and natural, guiding the viewer's gaze through a carefully constructed visual narrative. This work is especially relevant within Goya's oeuvre because it encapsulates his ability to address philosophical and political themes through art. In a moment of intense personal and social reflection, Truth, Time, and History stands as a reminder of the fragility and persistence of human ideals in times of adversity. It is a work that not only transcends its historical context, but also resonates with universal issues. An intriguing detail is the inclusion of small elements almost hidden in the background, such as an hourglass and a scroll, which reinforce the central symbolism of the work. These elements, although discreet, enrich the narrative and offer the viewer a deeper and more meaningful experience. Number 32. The Flower Girls. 1778. In 1778, in the middle of the 18th century, Francisco de Goya created The Flower Girls, a work that celebrates the beauty of everyday life and the connection with nature. This painting, characterized by its focus on female figures surrounded by flowers, stands out for its freshness and luminosity, a representation of the idyll between humans and the natural environment. The work is part of a series of costumbrist compositions that Goya made in his early years, where his artistic genius was already evident. From a technical point of view, Goya uses a palette of vibrant colors, where pastel tones predominate, highlighting the delicacy of the flowers and figures. The brushstrokes are soft but precise, achieving a perfect balance between detail and atmosphere. The contrast between the textures of the flowers and the clothing of the figures adds a visual dynamism that invites the viewer to explore every corner of the composition. The importance of this work in Goya's career lies in its ability to capture the essence of everyday life without falling into triviality. Through The Flower Girls, the artist establishes a dialogue between the ordinary and the sublime, proving that even the simplest moments can be elevated to an exceptional artistic level. This piece is a testament to his ability to find beauty in the mundane and present it with a unique sensitivity. One element that is particularly striking is the serene and contemplative expression of the female figures, which seems to suggest a spiritual connection with the surroundings. This subtle detail adds an emotional dimension to the work, making the viewer feel part of the scene. Number 31. The Martianist of Santa Cruz. 1805. In 1805, in the 19th century, Francisco de Goya painted The Martianist of Santa Cruz, a work that embodies the elegance and sophistication of the Spanish aristocracy. This portrait, commissioned by the Martianist herself, stands out for its exquisite representation of the female figure, enveloped in an air of grace and distinction. The painting is set at a time when Goya enjoyed great prestige as a portrait painter, consolidating his position as one of the most sought-after artists of his time. The technique employed in this work is impeccable. Goya uses soft lighting that highlights the delicate features of the Martianist, while the dark background contrasts with the luminosity of her figure. The texture of the fabrics and the minute details in the ornaments of her clothing demonstrate a technical skill that only a master could achieve. Each element in the composition is carefully balanced, creating a work of exceptional visual harmony. The significance of this portrait lies in its ability to transcend mere physical representation and capture the personality and character of the Martianist. Goya manages to convey a mix of power and vulnerability, reflecting not only the social status of his model, but also her humanity. This work is a perfect example of how art can serve as a bridge between reality and idealization. One detail worth highlighting is the delicate gesture of the Martianess holding a small lyre, a symbol of her love for the arts and music. This element, although subtle, adds a narrative layer that enriches the composition and underlines the complexity of her personality. Number 30. The Last Communion of Saint Joseph Calasanz. 1819. In 1819, Francisco de Goya completed one of his last religious works, The Last Communion of Saint Joseph Calasanz. This oil on canvas depicts the final act of devotion of the founder of the Piarists, an order dedicated to teaching and Christian education. The scene is imbued with solemn drama, where the chiaroscuro used by Goya accentuates the contrast between the fragility of the elderly priest and the heavenly atmosphere that surrounds him. The loose brushstrokes, characteristic of Goya's late style, endow the work with a vibrant energy that enhances the moment of spiritual communion. The historical context of this painting is set in the last years of Goya's life, a time marked by political unrest and the decline of his artistic career. Despite the conflicts in 19th-century Spain, Goya found in this commission an opportunity to reflect on faith and devotion in an increasingly secularized world. The work stands out for its pyramid-shaped composition, where the figures of the Piarists surrounding Saint Joseph of Calasanz direct their gaze towards the central point of the scene, the moment when he receives the sacrament. Goya's technique in this painting demonstrates an absolute mastery of color and light. The warm tones of the clothing contrast with the deep shadows of the surroundings, creating an atmosphere of spiritual intimacy. The loose and dynamic strokes reflect the maturity of an artist who, although affected by health problems and isolation, continued to explore new forms of expression. The work stands out not only for its technical quality, but also for its ability to capture the vulnerability and transcendence of a sacred moment. As a curious fact, this work was commissioned by the Piarist community, which wanted to immortalize the legacy of its founder. However, what Goya delivered exceeded initial expectations, becoming one of the most moving representations of the relationship between faith and human mortality. Number 29. The Family of the Duke of Osuna. 1788. In 1788, Francisco de Goya presented one of the most outstanding group portraits of his career, The Family of the Duke of Osuna. In this work, Goya portrays the dukes Pedro Tellez Gorin and Maria Josefa Pimentel together with their children, in a composition that combines elegance, intimacy, and a keen psychological observation. This commission reflects not only the importance of the family in the aristocracy of the 18th century, but also Goya's talent for capturing the individuality of each character. The portrait was painted at a historic moment of social and cultural change in Spain. The Enlightenment was beginning to influence the ideas of the nobility, and the Dukes of Osuna were prominent patrons of the arts and education. Goya, aware of the importance of this commission, strove to create a work that was both a reflection of the ideals of the time and a tribute to the family. The carefully planned arrangement of the figures and the use of a warm palette give the painting an atmosphere of harmony. The technical detail of the work is outstanding. The faces of the sitters are modeled with a delicacy that highlights their individual personalities. The textiles and ornaments reflect an absolute mastery of texture and color, demonstrating Goya's ability to capture the opulence of the clothing without losing sight of the humanity of the characters. The soft, natural lighting draws attention to the faces, highlighting the emotional connection between them. A curious detail of this work is the presence of the children, whose expressions reveal a more relaxed and natural approach than that of the adults. This reflects Goya's ability to humanize even the most formal commissions, creating a portrait that transcends the simple recording of a moment to become a timeless masterpiece. Number 28. Auto da Fe of the Inquisition. From the year 1812 to the year 1816. Between 1812 and 1816, Francisco de Goya created Auto de Fe de la Inquisición, one of his most striking and critical works on the institutions of power in Spain. This painting belongs to the series of dark paintings that Goya made during the Napoleonic invasion and the restoration of Ferdinand VII, periods of great political and religious repression. The work crudely portrays an Inquisition ceremony in which the accused, with covered and humiliated faces, are subjected to a public trial. The historical context of this painting cannot be ignored. The Inquisition, although already in decline, was still a tool of ideological control in the 19th century. Goya, as a critical observer of his time, used this work to denounce the injustice and arbitrariness of ecclesiastical power. The claustrophobic composition, dominated by dark tones and static figures, creates an oppressive atmosphere that reinforces the message of the work. Technically, Goya employs a restrained palette and rough brushstrokes to convey the gravity of the moment. The lighting, directed towards the faces of the accused, makes them the focus of attention, while the audience around them is plunged into shadow, representing the indifference or complicity of society. The compositional simplicity reinforces the emotional force of the scene. Curiously, this work was never publicly exhibited during Goya's lifetime, as its implicit criticism would have been considered subversive. Today, it is one of the most studied pieces for its bravery and for the implacable portrait of a system that deeply marked Spanish history. Number 27. The Dream of Lies and Inconstancy. From the year 1797 to the year 1799. Between 1797 and 1799, Francisco de Goya created one of his most enigmatic works, The Dream of Lies and Inconstancy. This engraving, part of the series, Los Caprichos, represents an allegory of human vices and weaknesses, in a style that combines symbolism and social criticism. The work shows grotesque and surreal figures, enveloped in a dreamlike landscape that challenges the artistic conventions of its time. The historical context of this work is set in a period of personal and political crisis for Goya. Affected by deafness and disenchanted with the society of his time, the artist expressed in Los Caprichos a mordant and deeply pessimistic vision of the human being. El sueño de la mentira y la inconstancia, The Dream of Lies and Inconstancy, reflects these concerns through symbols such as masks, disproportionate figures, and an atmosphere of moral ambiguity. Technically, the etching stands out for its complexity and detail. Goya uses an etching technique combined with wash to create a rich variety of textures and shadows. Dynamic lines and contrasts of light and dark guide the viewer's eye, revealing new layers of meaning with each observation. The work is a brilliant example of how Goya used etching as a medium to express ideas that could not be represented in official commissions. A fascinating fact is that this series, initially published anonymously, was withdrawn from the market shortly after its release due to its controversial content. However, its influence on modern art and social criticism remains undeniable. Number 26. The Forge. From 1812 to 1816. Between 1812 and 1816, Francisco Goya painted The Forge, a work that captures the force and dynamism of physical labor at a time when industrialization was beginning to transform Europe. The painting depicts three men working intensely in a forge, their robust bodies illuminated by the glow of the fire. This oil on canvas combines realism with dramatic composition, exalting the dignity of human endeavor. The historical context of The Forge is especially relevant. Spain was in a period of reconstruction after the War of Independence against France, and Goya, through this work, seems to pay homage to the resistance and strength of its people. The choice of subject, unusual for the time, reflects an interest in everyday life and the working classes, in contrast to the aristocratic portraits that marked much of his career. From a technical point of view, the painting stands out for its masterful use of light and color. The warm tones of the fire contrast with the deep shadows surrounding the workers, creating a chiaroscuro effect that highlights their muscles and movements. Goya's vigorous and expressive brushstrokes give the scene a sense of immediacy and energy. One notable detail is how Goya manages to humanize his subjects, moving away from heroic stereotypes to show their genuine effort and concentration. This work, although less known than others in his catalog, remains a testament to Goya's talent for capturing the essence of his time with a unique sensitivity. Number 25. The Snowfall, Winter. From the year 1786 to the year 1787. The work La Nevada, Winter, created between 1786 and 1787, is one of the tapestries designed by Francisco de Goya for the Royal Tapestry Factory in Madrid. This work, commissioned during the 18th century, captures the harshness of winter in an everyday scene that combines realism and artistic sensitivity. Goya employed a masterful technique to convey the rigor of the season, making use of muted colors, especially grays and whites, which dominate the composition. The attention to detail in the facial expressions of the peasants and the folds of their clothing convey the cold and the difficulties faced by the working classes of the time. In its historical context, this work reflects the efforts of Charles III to improve the quality of life and visual culture in Spain, as tapestries decorated royal palaces and had a functional and aesthetic purpose. Goya stood out for his ability to depict not only picturesque scenes, but also to capture human emotions in ordinary situations. In this case, the peasants' efforts to cross a snowy road become a symbol of resistance and unity in the face of adversity. Technically, the composition stands out for its use of chiaroscuro to accentuate the winter atmosphere. The loose brushstrokes and diffuse contours suggest a snow-covered landscape, while the human figures, although central, are harmoniously integrated into the natural environment. This balance between detail and abstraction marks an important step in Goya's evolution towards a more personal and expressive style. As a whole, The Snowfall, El Invierno, is a testament to Goya's talent for transforming official commissions into works that transcend their original function. An interesting detail is how the snow, depicted here in somber tones, contrasts with the brighter, more festive scenes of other tapestries, revealing the painter's versatility in themes and moods. Number 24. The Walk of Andalusia, 1777. The Walk of Andalusia, completed in 1777, is one of the tapestry cartoons produced by Francisco de Goya during the 18th century. In this work, Goya depicts a dynamic and joyful country scene, showing a group of young people enjoying a sunny day in a bucolic setting. The bright colors and flowing lines reflect the influence of Rococo painting, which was predominant at the time, but also show the first signs of the more direct and realistic approach that would characterize Goya in later years. Historically, this work is set in a period of change in Spain, where the cultural modernization promoted by Charles III sought to unify art and everyday life. Goya captured this spirit, providing an idealized but accessible vision of popular customs. The figures, dressed in traditional Andalusian costumes, convey a sense of regional identity that resonated with both the nobility and the common people. In technical terms, Goya used brilliant chromaticism, with greens, yellows, and blues dominating the palette. The perspective is carefully constructed to direct attention to the main group, but the background, with distant mountains and trees, provides depth and visual richness. This balance between narrative details and overall composition reinforces the impression of a spontaneous and vibrant scene. A particularity of this work is its ability to capture the essence of a fleeting moment with impressive naturalness. In the Walk of Andalusia, Goya demonstrates how tapestries could be both decorative and cultural documents of an era, reflecting the traditions and spirit of a region in a time of transformation. Number 23. The Puppet. From 1791 to 1792. The Pelele, created between 1791 and 1792, is one of the most recognized works of Francisco de Goya's tapestry cartoons. It represents a joyful and dynamic scene where a group of women are having fun tossing a straw doll into the air over a blanket. This composition stands out for its playful character and for the way in which Goya combines popular tradition with a critical sense that underlies many of his works. Contextually, this work is set in a period of transition towards the 19th century, when popular customs and traditions began to be integrated into high-level artistic production. Although apparently light and festive, El Pelele can be interpreted as a reflection on human relationships, with the doll representing a figure of mockery or social criticism, depending on the viewer's interpretation. Technically, Goya excels in his depiction of movement. The figures are positioned to suggest a dynamic circle, while the doll appears to float lightly, creating a sense of suspension. The predominantly warm colors and the facial expressions of the women add liveliness and humor to the scene. The significance of El Pelele lies in how Goya managed to capture a popular tradition with a style that combines the pictorial and the narrative. This tapestry cartoon not only decorated royal spaces, but also offered a unique look at the traditions and psychology of its time, making it a testimony of everyday life and its transformation into art. Number 22. The Wedding. From 1791 to 1792. The Wedding, painted between 1791 and 1792, is a vibrant portrait of 18th century Spanish society, captured in a moment of celebration. Francisco de Goya presents a scene packed with characters, from the bride and groom to the guests, all gathered in front of a church for a wedding ceremony. Through this cartoon, Goya captured the social diversity of the time, from the ostentation of the rich to the humility of the poor. The historical context of this work reflects the social hierarchy and traditions that marked Spanish life at the end of the 18th century. In the scene, the contrasts between the characters' clothing and attitudes reinforce the message of social inequality, while the festive atmosphere softens it with a layer of optimism and unity. Artistically, The Wedding is a masterpiece of composition and detail. Goya used a rich palette of gold, red, and brown tones, which bring warmth and harmony to the scene. The expressions and postures of the characters are carefully crafted to tell multiple stories within a single image, turning the painting into a mosaic of human emotions. In this work, Goya once again demonstrates his ability to transform everyday scenes into meaningful works of art. The Wedding not only decorates, but invites the viewer to reflect on the social dynamics and rituals that make up the life of a community. Number 21. The Parasol. 1777. The Parasol, created in 1777, is one of Francisco de Goya's most iconic works within his series of tapestry cartoons. This piece portrays an elegant young woman seated while a man, possibly her lover, holds a parasol to protect her from the sun. The scene is an ode to fashion and the romantic ideal of the 18th century, rendered with exquisite attention to detail and a charm that reflects the Rococo style. The historical context of the Parasol places it at a time when the aristocracy was looking for art that reflected an idealized and pleasurable life. This cartoon, intended to decorate a royal space, served that purpose by evoking a feeling of lightness and bucolic beauty. However, Goya added his distinctive touch, creating characters who seem to have a more complex inner life than the surface suggests. Technically, the work stands out for its handling of color and light. The bright tones of the costumes contrast with the natural background, and the parasol itself serves as a focal point that unifies the composition. The delicate brushstrokes and the calm expression of the young woman suggest an atmosphere of serenity and enjoyment. With the parasol, Goya consolidated his reputation as a master capable of elevating the simplest of subjects to an exceptional artistic level. This cartoon not only served as decoration, but also as a testament to the painter's ability to capture the spirit of his time in a seemingly simple yet deeply evocative image. Number 20. The Kite. From 1777 to 1778. Created between 1777 and 1778 AD, the kite is a masterpiece that exemplifies the transition of art towards a more intimate and everyday approach, characteristic of Francisco de Goya. In the historical context of the 18th century, Spain was experiencing a cultural flourishing, with the Enlightenment influencing artistic thought and expression. Goya, who was already establishing himself as an undisputed master, used this work to capture a playful scene that reflects the spirit of his time, while demonstrating his exceptional technical mastery and his sensitivity to the small details of everyday life. The composition features a group of figures playing with a kite in a rural setting. Goya uses a warm color palette that evokes the serenity of nature, highlighting his skill in working with earth tones and soft blues. The figures are arranged in a way that guides the eye toward the sky, where the kite floats, symbolizing freedom and hope. The dynamism of the postures and facial expressions conveys a sense of movement, vitality, and connection between the characters. This approach humanizes the scene, giving it a sense of authenticity that is distinctive to Goya's early work. Technically, Goya's loose brushwork was already beginning to distinguish itself from his contemporaries, who favored more polished finishes. His handling of light and shadow gives the scene depth, while the slightly diffuse atmosphere anticipates the more expressive style that would characterize his later works. This painting also highlights Goya's ability to capture anecdotal details, such as the children's clothing and the landscape, which add a narrative layer to the scene. The kite is not only a celebration of rural life, but also a reflection on the small joys that transcend time. Interestingly, this work is part of a series of cartoons for tapestries destined for the royal palace of El Pardo, which underlines its importance in Goya's artistic development. Number 19. Blind Man's Bluff. 1788. Blind Man's Buff, created in 1788 AD, is an iconic work that showcases Goya's mastery in capturing moments of everyday life with a level of detail and emotion that few artists of his time were able to achieve. In the 18th century, Spain was immersed in a process of social and cultural change, and Goya positioned himself as a visual chronicler of this transformation. Conceived as a tapestry cartoon, this work stands out for its vibrant composition and its depiction of a popular game, becoming a visual testimony to Spanish folklore and traditions. The scene shows a group of young people playing Blind Man's Buff, a traditional game that symbolizes both innocence and collective pleasure. Goya uses bright colors and soft lighting to convey an atmosphere of joy and camaraderie. The figures are carefully arranged in a space that, although simple, reflects an idealized natural environment. The circular arrangement of the characters directs the viewer's attention to the center of the action, where one of the players, blindfolded, tries to catch the others. Goya's painting style in this work combines precision and spontaneity. The dynamic brushwork and nuances of light and shadow add a sense of movement, while the details of the characters' clothing and faces show his ability to portray individuality and emotion. In addition, the slightly elevated perspective allows the viewer to feel like a privileged observer of the scene. This work not only has aesthetic value, but also documents an essential part of 18th century Spanish popular culture. It is worth noting that Blind Man's Hen is considered one of the most representative pieces of the tapestry cartoons commissioned by the Royal Tapestry Factory of Santa Barbara. Number 18. The Grape Harvest, Autumn. From the year 1786 to the year 1787. The Harvest, Autumn, painted between 1786 and 1787 AD, is a work that celebrates the connection between humans and nature through an idealized representation of the harvest. In the 18th century, this theme was deeply rooted in European artistic tradition, but Goya approaches it with a freshness and warmth that distinguish him. This cartoon for tapestries destined for the royal palace combines the symbolism of autumn with a personal approach that elevates the everyday scene to a unique artistic dimension. The painting shows a group of peasants harvesting grapes, with a vineyard and a clear sky as a backdrop. The composition is carefully balanced, with the main figures in the foreground and a landscape stretching out towards the horizon. The warm colors, dominated by ochres, golds and greens, evoke the richness of the autumn season, while soft light bathes the scene, creating a serene and contemplative atmosphere. Goya's technique in this work demonstrates his ability to capture the interaction between the figures and their surroundings. The natural gestures and facial expressions convey a sense of calm joy, reflecting both the effort and enjoyment of the harvest. In addition, the attention to detail in the elements of the landscape and the texture of the clothing adds a layer of realism that enriches the visual narrative. The harvest is more than a representation of rural life. It is a tribute to human labor and the beauty of nature. This cartoon falls during a period when Goya was consolidating his position as a court painter, and his success with these works marked a milestone in his artistic career. Number 17. The Duchess of Alba in Black. 1797. In 1797 AD, Francisco de Goya painted the Duchess of Alba in black, a work that captures not only the elegance of its sitter but also the psychological depth that characterized the most important portraits of the 18th century. By this time, Goya was an established painter, and as a portraitist he showed a particular interest in revealing the character and personality of his subjects. The Duchess of Alba, one of the most enigmatic figures of her time, became the focus of one of his most celebrated and controversial portraits. The painting shows the Duchess dressed in black, standing in a desolate landscape that contrasts with the vitality of her posture and expression. The choice of black as the main color symbolizes both mourning and sobriety, while the details in her clothing reflect her status and sophistication. The Duchess's direct gaze, charged with pride and defiance, establishes an immediate connection with the viewer, while the inscription, "Only Goya," in the sand adds an element of mystery and possible intimacy between the artist and his model. Technically, this work stands out for its fluid brushwork and subtle modulation of dark tones to create volume and texture. Goya demonstrates his mastery in balancing the simplicity of the composition with the emotional complexity of the portrait. The details of the face and hands are especially notable, as they convey both the nobility and humanity of the Duchess. The Duchess of Alba in Black remains one of Goya's most analyzed works, not only for its artistic value, but also for the stories surrounding its creation. Number 16. The Countess of Chinchin, 1800. The Countess of Chinchin, painted in 1800 AD, is one of Francisco de Goya's most outstanding portraits. In the context of the 19th century, this work reflects Goya's evolution towards a more introspective and emotional style, focusing on the psychological representation of his subjects. The Countess, Maria Teresa de Borbone de Villabriga, appears as a symbol of the delicacy and refinement of her era, while the portrait itself reveals the tensions and complexities of the Spanish court. The portrait shows the Countess seated, dressed in an elegant light-colored dress that contrasts with the dark background. Her expression is serene but melancholic, conveying a sense of introspection and vulnerability. The composition, simple but deeply effective, stands out for its balance between the main figure and the carefully crafted details, such as the textures of the fabrics and the ornaments. Goya uses a soft palette and subdued lighting to create an effect of delicacy, while his fluid, expressive brushwork adds dynamism to the work. The attention to detail in the Countess's hands and face shows the artist's ability to capture both the physicality and the emotional essence of his subjects. This portrait is also distinguished by its intimate atmosphere, suggesting a personal connection between the painter and his subject. The Countess of Chinchin is a perfect example of how Goya combined the tradition of court portraiture with a more modern and expressive approach. Acclaimed both in its time and today, the work is considered a testament to Goya's genius and his ability to transcend the artistic conventions of his time. Number 15. The Burial of the Sardine, from 1812 to 1819. Set in the years of political upheaval that characterized the beginning of the 19th century, The Burial of the Sardine is a work in which Francisco de Goya masterfully addresses the ambiguity of celebration and satire. This painting, developed between 1812 and 1819, shows a popular festival that evokes the carnivals of Madrid, where the ritual of the burial of the sardine marked the end of the celebrations. However, beyond the festive, Goya introduces dark elements that suggest a critical view of the social customs of his time. Technically, the work stands out for its bold use of loose brushstrokes and a palette of bright but restrained colors, which contrast with the caricatured faces of the characters. These figures, mostly masked, reinforce the carnivalesque yet disturbing atmosphere. Goya employs a dynamic composition, with the central group arranged in a semicircle, as if rotating around an invisible axis, generating a sense of movement. The texture of the oil reflects his mature technique, with strokes that suggest details without needing to define them completely. In the context of Goya's career, this painting represents his ability to capture the essence of the popular without neglecting the complexity of human feelings. It is set in a time when Spain was facing profound social and political transformations, something that Goya reflected in his works with a mixture of irony and denunciation. His ability to portray the grotesque and the sublime at the same time consolidated his reputation as one of the greatest visual chroniclers of his time. A curious detail is how, beneath the apparent festive chaos, one can interpret a criticism of the moral emptiness of a society more interested in spectacle than in substance. This duality between celebration and decadence remains one of the most fascinating aspects of the work. Number 14. The Meadow of San Isidro, 1788. The Meadow of San Isidro, painted in 1788, is an iconic work that captures everyday life in 18th century Madrid. Depicting the crowds gathering on the banks of the Manzanares River to celebrate the feast of San Isidro, the city's patron saint, this painting is a testament to Goya's mastery of depicting popular scenes. The painting captures the vibrant, luminous atmosphere of a day of celebration, with a crowd stretching out toward the horizon under a clear sky. Goya's technique in this work is delicate and detailed, using warm tones and careful brushstrokes to bring the crowd to life. Each figure seems to be part of an organic whole, demonstrating his mastery in capturing both collective character and individual nuances. Spatial depth is achieved through a composition that guides the eye toward the river, while dynamism is maintained through the movement of the figures. Historically, this painting is set at a time when Goya was beginning to establish himself as a portraitist and chronicler of his time. It represents his ability to balance an interest in the everyday with an artistic sensitivity that transcends the merely descriptive. This work is a precursor to his later, darker and more critical works, but it already hints at the social concern that defines much of his production. A fascinating aspect of the Meadow of San Isidro is how Goya manages to capture not only a specific scene, but also the spirit of an era. This painting, while seemingly festive, can be interpreted as a symbol of the underlying tensions in a society on the verge of momentous changes. Number 13. The Pilgrimage of San Isidro, of the Black Paintings. From 1819 to 1823. The Pilgrimage of San Isidro, painted between 1819 and 1823, is part of the famous Black Paintings, a series of works that represent the apex of introspection and darkness in Goya's work. In this painting, the artist returns to the feast of San Isidro, but from a completely different perspective than the one he had shown in The Meadow of San Isidro. Here, the atmosphere is somber, with deformed figures and expressions that convey anguish and despair, rather than joy. The technique used in this work is radically different from his previous works. Goya uses dark tones and a limited palette, dominated by blacks, browns, and grays, with thick, gestural brushstrokes that give the scene a disturbing energy. The composition is chaotic, with characters who seem to get lost in a desolate landscape, accentuating the feeling of isolation and alienation. This work reflects Goya's own state of mind in his later years, marked by illness, deafness, and disillusionment with society. Through The Pilgrimage of San Isidro, Goya not only expresses a social critique, but also a portrait of the human condition in its darkest aspect. It is a piece that challenges the traditional view of the holiday, transforming it into a nightmare scenario. An intriguing detail is how Goya turns a scene that should be a celebration into an allegory of moral and spiritual decadence. This duality between the festive and the sinister is a constant in the Black Paintings, consolidating them as one of the most striking series in the history of art. Number 12. The Colossus. From 1808 to 1812. The Colossus, painted between 1808 and 1812, is one of Francisco de Goya's most enigmatic and talked about works. This imposing painting reflects the chaos and uncertainty of Spain during the Napoleonic invasion, represented through the figure of a giant dominating the landscape. The interpretation of this work has been the subject of debate, but it is commonly associated with the resistance of the Spanish people against the invading forces. In technical terms, the work is notable for its dramatic use of scale, with the figure of the Colossus contrasting against a tiny landscape of panicked villages and crowds. Goya employs a dark palette, with tones that emphasize the atmosphere of oppression and terror. The brushstrokes, though seemingly loose, are charged with intention, bringing movement and drama to the scene. In the context of his career, the Colossus is an example of Goya's engagement with the historical events of his time. Although in other works he addresses similar themes more explicitly, here he opts for an allegorical representation that amplifies the emotional impact of the work. The figure of the Colossus can be interpreted as a personification of war, strength, or even hope. An interesting detail of the painting is how Goya manages to simultaneously capture monumentality and fragility, reflecting the duality of a people who, although small compared to the giant of war, do not give up in the face of adversity. Number 11. The Bordeaux Milkmaid, from 1825 to 1827. In the last years of his life, Goya created The Milkmaid of Bordeaux, a work that, although seemingly simple, is one of the most moving and revealing of his career. Painted between 1825 and 1827, this portrait of a young milkmaid is an example of the freer and more experimental style that characterized his final period in Bordeaux. In contrast to the dark tones of his earlier works, this painting shines with soft colors and a light that radiates serenity. Goya's technique in this work is remarkably fluid, with light brushstrokes that suggest rather than define. The figure of the milkmaid, although central, is integrated into a blurred background that reinforces its ethereal air. The palette, dominated by pastel tones, contrasts with the emotional intensity of the black paintings, revealing a more hopeful and peaceful side to his art. In historical terms, the Milkmaid of Bordeaux represents a symbolic end to Goya's career. Far from the turmoil of Spain, in his exile in France, the artist seems to find in this work a form of reconciliation with life. Despite his advanced age and deteriorating health, Goya here demonstrates an artistic freshness that challenges the conventions of the time. A fascinating detail about this work is how, through its simplicity, Goya manages to convey an emotional complexity that resonates with the viewer. The Milkmaid of Bordeaux is not only a portrait, but also a testament to the indomitable spirit of an artist who continued to explore until the end of his life. Number 10. The Sabbath of the Black Paintings. From the year 1819 to the year 1823, the Witches' Sabbath is part of the group known as the Black Paintings, created by Francisco de Goya between 1819 and 1823 in the Quinta del Sordo. This period corresponds to the 19th century after Christ and is marked by a social context of intense political and cultural changes in Spain, influenced by absolutism and post-Napoleonic conflicts. The work reflects a gloomy and oppressive atmosphere, the result of the fears and sorrows of its creator, who captured in it the hopelessness and darkness of his time. The technique used in this painting is oil on plaster, later transferred to canvas. The style, characteristic of the Black paintings, is raw and expressive, with vigorous brushstrokes and a palette dominated by dark tones, such as browns, blacks, and ochres. In The Witches' Sabbath, Goya depicts a satirical and macabre scene of witchcraft, where a goat, the emblem of the devil, presides over a witch's Sabbath surrounded by grotesque human figures. The deformed faces and exaggerated postures capture the superstition and fear that surrounded the practice of witchcraft at that time. In Goya's career, this work stands out as a manifesto of his most personal and introspective vision. As it was not intended for the public, Goya allowed himself unusual creative freedom, exploring the darkest corners of his imagination. Critics consider this painting a precursor to Expressionism and Surrealism, movements that would gain strength more than a century later. A fascinating fact is how this work, along with the other Black paintings, remained ignored for decades after the painter's death. It was in the 20th century that they began to be valued as a testimony ahead of their time, full of symbolism and criticism of the irrational beliefs of their society. Number 9. Clubbing of the Black Paintings. From 1819 to 1823. In Duel with Cudgels, Francisco de Goya presents a striking and deeply disturbing scene that is part of the Black paintings. This painting was created between 1819 and 1823, in the middle of the 19th century, after Christ, during the last years of the artist's life. The work is set in a historical context where Spain faced internal divisions and a climate of political uncertainty following the Napoleonic invasion and the return of absolutism. Goya channeled this social chaos through images charged with violence and unrest. The painting, done in oil on plaster and later transferred to canvas, shows two men engaged in a fierce fight, buried up to their knees in the ground, with clubs as weapons. The almost theatrical composition emphasizes the brutality of the scene, while the dark palette and dense brushstrokes reinforce the atmosphere of desolation. The tense faces and postures of the combatants convey a sense of immediacy, almost as if the viewer were an involuntary witness to this tragedy. In Goya's artistic panorama, this work symbolizes the fratricidal struggle that characterized Spain during his time. Beyond its aesthetic value, Duel with Cudgels is a scathing commentary on the irrationality of human conflicts, reflecting the political and social divisions that tore the country apart. A remarkable curiosity is how this work, conceived as a private decoration, has transcended the centuries to become an icon of universal art. Its crudeness and timeless message still resonate today as a warning against violence and hatred. Number 8. Half-Sunken Dog, from the Black paintings. From the year 1819 to the year 1823. Half-Sunken Dog, one of Francisco de Goya's most enigmatic compositions, was created between 1819 and 1823, in the 19th century after Christ. This work is part of the Black paintings, made in the privacy of the Quinta del Sordo, in a context of increasing isolation and illness of the artist. Spain at the time was marked by an oppressive environment, with internal conflicts and a society that transitioned between superstition and modernity. The painting, in oil on plaster, stands out for its minimalist composition precursor to modern art. Pero Semihendido anticipates currents such as surrealism and abstract expressionism. Its ability to evoke deep emotions through such an austere visual language has been a source of admiration and analysis for centuries. A fascinating fact is how this work, despite its apparent simplicity, has inspired generations of artists, becoming a symbol of the existential struggle of human beings in the face of the unknown. Number 7. The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters, Caprico number 43. From the year 1797 to the year 1799. The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters is one of the most iconic prints by Francisco de Goya, created between 1797 and 1799, in the 18th century after Christ. This work belongs to the series of engravings known as Los Caprichos, where the artist addresses with irony and crudeness the ills of the Spanish society of his time, including superstition, ignorance, and corruption. In an Enlightenment context, Goya positions himself as a scathing critic of traditional structures. The technique used in this work is etching and aquatint, which allows for a remarkable contrast between light and shadow. In the image, a man sleeps with his head on his arms, while grotesque creatures, such as bats and owls, emerge from the shadows, symbolizing the monsters that are born when reason is abandoned. The composition is a reflection of the conflict between enlightened rationality and the dark superstitious habits of the 18th century. This work is crucial in Goya's career, as it marks his transition towards a more introspective and committed art. With it, the artist not only denounced the vices of his time, but also anticipated the concerns that would dominate Romanticism. An intriguing detail is how this engraving has been interpreted as a universal warning about the consequences of ignoring reason, a message that remains relevant in contemporary contexts. Number 6. On May 2, 1808 in Madrid, the charge of the Mamelukes. 1814. The 2nd of May 1808 in Madrid, also known as the Charge of the Mamelukes, is one of Francisco de Goya's most iconic works, painted in 1814, in the 19th century after Christ. This painting commemorates the uprising of the people of Madrid against Napoleonic troops, a key event in the Spanish War of Independence. In a context of resistance and patriotism, Goya created this work as a visual testimony to the bravery and suffering of his nation. The painting, executed in oil on canvas, is monumental in both size and impact. Goya uses a dynamic composition and a vibrant palette to capture the chaos and brutality of battle. The figure's dramatic gestures and energetic brushstrokes convey a sense of movement and urgency. The Mamelukes, mercenaries in Napoleon's service, appear as exotic figures, accentuating the contrast between invaders and patriots. In Goya's career, this work stands as an example of his ability to combine art and historical chronicle. Its focus on human suffering and violence set a precedent for the modern representation of war in art. A notable fact is how this work, along with the 3rd of May 1808, consolidated Goya as one of the greatest visual chroniclers of his time, transforming historical episodes into images of profound emotional and universal impact. Number 5. The Family of Charles IV. From 1800 to 1801. Against the backdrop of a Spain profoundly transformed by the ideas of the Enlightenment and the impact of the brewing Napoleonic Wars, Francisco de Goya created a masterpiece that captures the pomp and contradictions of the Spanish monarchy at the beginning of the 19th century. The Family of Charles IV is a group portrait that brings together members of the royal family in a composition that, at first glance, exalts their authority and splendor. However, Goya's penetrating artistic eye reveals darker nuances. The characters, depicted with an unflattering sincerity, reflect the emotional and political complexity of the moment. Goya employs a style marked by unwavering realism. The textures of the fabrics, the meticulousness of the jewelry, and the precision of the faces highlight his technical mastery. However, what truly elevates this painting is its ability to transcend mere physical representation. Through the arrangement of the figures and their expressions, Goya hints at the internal tensions within the royal family, such as the lack of cohesion and the challenges inherent in leadership in uncertain times. The figure of Charles IV, despite occupying the center of the composition, lacks the dominant presence typical of monarchs in royal portraits, while Maria Luisa of Parma seems to exert a more visible influence, suggesting her role as de facto leader. This work marks a high point in Goya's career as a court painter. Beyond technical skill, it shows his courage in depicting the powerful with an honesty bordering on satire, a rarity in an artistic environment dominated by flattering praise. The painting also reveals his fascination with exploring the human condition in all its facets, even within the confines of absolute power. A fascinating detail is the discreet inclusion of Goya himself in the background, working on his canvas. This gesture not only reaffirms his place in the artistic scene of his time, but also suggests his role as a critical witness of a turbulent era. Number 4. The Clothed Maja. From 1800 to 1807. At the height of his career, Francisco de Goya challenged social and artistic norms with The Clothed Maja, a painting that, along with its nude counterpart, redefined female portraiture in 19th century European art. Created in a Spain where decorum and morality dictated the boundaries of art, this work breaks new ground by presenting a female figure who, though covered in delicate fabrics, radiates a palpable sensuality. Goya opts for a relaxed posture and a direct gaze that immediately connects the viewer with the model, giving her a presence that goes beyond the physical. The soft, well-defined fabrics, with a chromatic range that combines warm and cold tones, highlight the painter's technical skill, while the loose, lively brushstrokes add dynamism to the neutral background. Despite being clothed, the Maja maintains an air of mystery and boldness, which sets her apart from traditional portraits of women of the time, generally confined to more conservative roles. This work is considered an inseparable complement to La Maja Desnuda, but not only because of the obvious contrast between the two. Together, they explore the boundaries between the public and the private, the acceptable and the forbidden, raising questions about the perception of the female body and identity in a deeply patriarchal society. The cultural and artistic impact of this painting cannot be underestimated. Although the identities of the sitter and the commissioner remain a matter of speculation, the fact that Goya executed it in secret adds a layer of intrigue that continues to fascinate critics and viewers. Number 3. The Naked Maja. From 1795 to 1800, Francisco de Goya challenged the established norms of his time with The Naked Maja, a work that stands out for both its thematic boldness and its artistic excellence. Created in a cultural context where the depiction of the nude female body was strictly regulated, this painting broke new ground by presenting a female figure that not only lacks any trace of classical idealization, but is also fully aware of her sensuality. Goya takes an innovative approach to the pose of the model, who lies reclining on a divan with an expression that mixes curiosity and defiance. The absence of mythological or allegorical elements, common in nudes of the time, reinforces the human and earthly character of the work. The warm color palette and soft brushstrokes create a texture that evokes realism, while the use of subtle shadows gives depth and volume to the model's body. This painting marked a milestone in Goya's career, even bringing him into conflict with the Inquisition, which considered the work a challenge to the morality of the time. Its relevance lies in how it combines masterful technique with a cultural statement, the autonomy and strength of the female body as a subject, not just as an object. An intriguing aspect is how The Naked Maja anticipates modernism in its ability to provoke diverse emotions and reactions, becoming a precursor of contemporary art. Number 2. Saturn Devouring His Son, from the Black Paintings. From the year 1819 to the year 1823. Among Francisco de Goya's most striking works, Saturn Devouring His Son stands out as a brutal testament to the painter's inner demons and the political and social climate of the 19th century. Created as part of the Black Paintings that decorated the walls of his home, this work depicts a mythological scene with a visceral intensity that transcends its original subject. The painting shows the god Saturn in the act of devouring one of his children, with an expression of terror and madness that reflects absolute despair. Goya uses a somber and expressionist style, with a dark color palette and chaotic brushstrokes that accentuate the violence of the scene. The disproportionate anatomy and the empty gaze of the god contribute to creating a nightmarish atmosphere. This work is interpreted as an allegory of power struggles, the passage of time and the horrors of war, recurring themes in Goya's work. In the context of the Napoleonic Wars and political turmoil in Spain, Saturn Devouring His Son can be seen as a commentary on humanity's self-destruction and the insatiable thirst for power that leads to ruin. A fascinating fact is that Goya never planned to exhibit these paintings. They were a private act, which gives them an emotional authenticity that resonates deeply with the viewer. Number 1. On May 3, 1808 in Madrid, The Shootings of May 3, 1814. Considered one of the undisputed masterpieces of art history, Francisco de Goya's The 3rd of May 1808 in Madrid captures the tragedy and heroism of a pivotal moment in the Spanish resistance against Napoleonic occupation. Painted in 1814, this monumental work commemorates the massacre of Spanish patriots at the hands of French troops and is notable for its ability to evoke an immediate emotional response. The center of the composition is occupied by an illuminated figure, whose arms are outstretched, evoking Christological images, becoming a symbol of sacrifice and redemption. Around him, Goya constructs a heartbreaking scene with anonymous soldiers representing the implacable machinery of war, while the fallen victims and their expressions of terror reflect human fragility in the face of violence. Goya's technique is masterful. Dramatic lighting, expressive brushstrokes, and color contrasts reinforce the visual and emotional impact of the work. This revolutionary approach would influence later artists such as Manet and Picasso, marking a turning point in Western art by prioritizing emotion and narrative over academic perfection. One detail that underlines the genius of this painting is the absence of conventional heroism. Instead of glorifying war, Goya shows its brutality, inviting the viewer to reflect on the consequences of human conflict. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Give it a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with your friends and family.